carrots and tomatoes, corn, beans and squash, calendula and asparagus, cauliflower and basil. Today's video will be a complete guide to companion planting. Everything you need to know so that the plants themselves can help you have the best harvest ever. Good morning and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. Today's video is really important because companion planting is really at the heart of what it is to garden guided by nature. Because companion planting is just a simplified version of what happens in nature. In nature, in a healthy ecosystem, what you have is a lot of biodiversity, a lot of native biodiversity. But when you have biodiversity, any of the pests that you might have in the garden, they just become one element out of many controlled by the many. And so companion planting as a microcosm of biodiversity is going to help you not only have healthier plants, but it's going to help you control insects, it's going to help you control disease, and it's also going to help you control foragers. I'm going to talk about specific groupings or specific pairings, but also what's important is developing that biodiversity, allowing other plants to grow, just giving a variety of plants. So sometimes I'll have plants that grow in the garden, and if they're growing in an area that I have some other vegetable, if I have enough of them, then I might just let those other plants take over a spot. Why? Because they're adding to the health of the overall garden. Also, they're gonna maybe provide food for some animals that come along that might prefer them to the plants that they're growing. You know, there was a comment about someone who they let dandelions grow around their lettuce, and the rabbits ate the dandelions instead of the lettuce. And that makes sense because the lettuce likely wasn't a native variety that the rabbits liked. They'd eat it if there was nothing else, but because the dandelions were there, they ate that instead. Animals will always prefer what they normally would eat in their ecosystem. But because we don't give a whole ton of a lot of space to animals, that's why a lot of people, especially in cities, but also in the countryside, have challenges with animals because there's not enough space given to them for wild food, for native food that they will prefer to choose. And so that's why in our garden and outside our garden, we let all sorts of plants grow, because that's the big picture companion planting, biodiversity. And that's why, you know, we've made sure as we've restored our forest that was dying when we arrived here, we have filled it with native species that are native to here. So, but that's the big picture of companion planting. It's a microcosm of nature. So if you know someone who's struggling with animal foragers, insects, disease in their garden, or poor soil, or any other reason, and you think they might benefit from watching this video, then share this video with them. Encourage them to watch it. Anyway, if you're curious about all that, well then, let's get started. Here we have the most traditional example of companion planting, the Three Sisters, brought to us by the First Nations. With companion planting, what happens is each plant helps each of the other plants. That's in many, many different ways, either with how they grow or with properties they have that help repel the other pests or help attract pollinators and so on. And the Three Sisters are no different. And so what we have here, corn here, we have squash over here and over here, and we have beans at the base of each one of these poles. So what's going to happen is this corn is going to help the beans along because it's going to grow tall and the beans are going to be able to grow up the corn. And so why do I have these stakes here? Because I don't want the beans to grow up the corn when the corn is still young and small. but I do want the beans to have already grown by the time the corn gets big. And so the beans are going to grow up these stakes, and then as the corn grows, the beans are going to attach themselves also to the corn. And so the beans are going to be anchored to these stakes and to the corn, and they're going to hold the corn up. Because the thing about corn is it has a tendency, when it's standing alone, to fall down in a heavy wind. Now, sometimes corn will grow side shoots. You shouldn't pull these side shoots off, because often people will tell you to pull them off. But these side shoots, especially if your corn is standing alone, will help the corn to stand up. Also, if for some reason the main stem gets damaged, well, these side shoots are going to replace that main stem. I wouldn't worry about the side shoots taking the energy from the rest of the plant. They're there for a reason. They're going to help the plant. What else does the beans do for the corn and the squash? The beans give a shelter to bacteria in their roots. Those bacteria will take nitrogen from the atmosphere, and they basically eat that nitrogen and they transform it into a form that the plants can eat. So the beans are going to feed themselves, the corn, and the squash. And corn is a really heavy feeder, so beans are a great thing to plant with corn or after corn to refeed the soil. And the squash are going to help the beans and the corn. Why? Because first of all, squash eventually get really, really big leaves, and so the squash leaves are going to shade the soil and keep it moist, and shade the roots of the plants to keep it cool as well. The other thing squash do, I don't know if you can see them, but there are little tiny prickles on the stems and on the vines. And the little animals really don't like the prickles. And these prickles get harder and stronger as the plant grows. And so the little animals don't like it. So now the important thing to remember about the three sisters, like the other companion planting, is timing. And so I will generally plant the corn and the squash at the same time, because I want to make sure the squash has time to grow big before the corn gets big. Because if the corn gets too big before the squash is grown, the squash is going to get shaded out and it's not going to grow much. And you really want your squash to really be big and to spread around the whole area for it to be able to properly protect the corn and the beans. I will plant the beans later, a couple weeks after the corn and squash at least, because beans have so much energy in their seed that they're going to germinate quickly and grow quickly, even if they're shaded out. They're a vine, they're just going to grow quickly and get higher than the rest of the plants. And another thing you can remember about the beans is, if you can have a look at the vine right here, it's starting to grow. Let's say you've got a trellis for it or something, or a teepee, and it reaches the top of the teepee, and you still want it to let it grow. If it keeps growing taller, it's just going to bend over and then fall over. You can trim the end of your bean vine, and it's going to if you trim the end of it once it's reached the top of your teepee, then it's going to grow new branches along the vine, and you're going to get a lot more beans harvested. It's the deer that taught us that when they came and ate some of our bean vines a few years ago. Now, the last thing I want to show you, I've spoken about this before, you might notice that there are some potato plants here. These were not planned. I put potatoes here in 2021 because I wanted potatoes here instead of the three sisters, but they've come back ever since, even though I've never planted them. And last year, for example, they came back so thickly in some of these hills I didn't really get much of a harvest of squash. But what I decided to do this year was just keep cutting it down like it's a weed until all these plants get established, and then I'll let the potatoes grow and sort of grow in underneath everything else. And then by the time all this stuff is almost done, the potatoes will still have time to produce. Now, what's interesting about having the potatoes here is in May, let's say, when I sow my squash, there's often a lot of cucumber beetles that grow that come and eat the seedlings. But here, where we have the potatoes, in contrast to in the back, further behind in the garden, where we have more three sisters but no potatoes, the squash grew a lot better. Somehow the potatoes masked the squash somewhat from the cucumber beetles. We did have some, but not nearly as many, and yet both areas have been equally planted with the Three Sisters, and so should have had an equal amount of damage from the cucumber beetles. But in the other areas where there are no potatoes, squash really got eaten up a lot, whereas here they didn't. My solution to those other areas was I always have backup squash plants that I plant in a little pot. I prefer to direct sow squash because it grows quickly, but I always plant backup. And I didn't really need a whole lot of my backups here anyways because of the potatoes. I needed some of them in the other area where there were none, but all those extra backup squash, well, I was able to plant them elsewhere outside the garden to give to the animals if they want them back. Put them back in the forest. Let's go on to our next group of plants. So here we have our cabbage and onion area. You saw me planting this in the companion planting intro video of several weeks ago. The onions were already planted and already more or less established, and I added the cabbage into the spaces between. As you can see now, the cabbages are growing really well, and the onions still have a good amount of space. Now the important thing here is the timing. Onions grow so much more slowly than everything else, than cabbage. But cabbage also grows slowly. So you had to put in the onions first so they get established, and then put in the cabbage. And the thing about all of this is when the cabbage start to get really big, almost too big for the onions, well, by that time it's going to be time to harvest these onions anyway, because I'm going to be harvesting these onions likely at the beginning or mid-August at the latest. And the thing about the onions is they help the cabbage along because they're aromatic and they repel the bugs that might go after the cabbage. And that's one of the important elements about companion planting. How the plants help each other out, but also their different growing patterns and how they combine with each other. Other aromatic plants that are around here that are going to help the cabbage are oregano right here, and also garlic at the other end. Another plant that's going to help the cabbage because they're heavy feeders is right behind me here. We have peas, and peas are like what I explained about the beans with the Three Sisters. They are going to feed the soil with the bacteria that grabs the nitrogen from the atmosphere, puts it into the soil. So the cabbages back here, where they get a little bit less sunlight than over there, are at least going to be fed by the peas. Now, it's been said that it takes a year before that food is available to the plants. I haven't really verified that. I've read that. However, because we plant peas here every year, then that extra nitrogen is already in the soil since last year. And finally, to the side here, we've got all these rose bushes and raspberries that are protecting the cabbages and the onions. Let's go on to our next group of vegetables. Here we have carrots and tomatoes that are the companion plants. We also have calendula, and inside over in here we have lettuce, broomcorn, and also around with the carrots there is also basil. All of these are planted with the tomatoes. Carrots, basil, and calendula are all aromatic plants that are going to repel the kinds of pests, the kinds of insects, etc. that come after the tomatoes. And so they're going to really benefit the tomatoes. Carrots just love tomatoes. Now, the important thing to remember about carrots being companion plants with tomatoes is they grow a lot more slowly than tomatoes. If I had planted these carrots at the same time as these tomatoes in this spot, the carrots would never have had time to grow. But because I planted them well in advance, they're already quite up. I put them in first, and then afterwards I put in the tomatoes. So they're already quite a bit up. The tomatoes are still small, so these carrots have a lot of time to still grow bigger, and eventually these tomatoes are going to be really big and they're going to be covering the carrots. But at that point, the carrots are going to be very big, and they are just at that point going to bide their time until the tomato harvest is finished. We'll be starting to harvest the tomatoes probably beginning to mid-August and harvesting them right up until maybe mid to late September, maybe even into October. But by the beginning of September, the plants start to begin to be a little bit less bushy. And so the carrots are going to begin to be able to have more sunlight. And then when we're all done harvesting these tomatoes, let's say by the end of September, when the first frosts come along, then the carrots are still going to have at least 2 months to grow and to finish growing, and we will be harvesting them in about the end of November. And we should have a really, really nice harvest. Now let's have a look in the middle there. Over there in the middle, between the tomatoes, there's broom corn and there's lettuce. Lettuce is also a good companion plant to have with tomatoes. You have to do the same thing as the carrots. Plant it in advance so it gets started before the tomatoes get big. But the thing about lettuce is it needs a lot of sunlight at the beginning to get going, to get growing. But then in the heat of the summer, you don't want it to have full sun, because then it will just bolt. It will go to seed, flower, and seed. Now I like to have my plants that go to flower and seed so I can collect the seeds, but I don't want them all to do that. So by the time that there's so much heat that the lettuce might do that, these tomatoes are going to be so big that they are going to shade that lettuce. Now the broom corn in the middle is going to be quite beautiful, and it's also going to help shade that lettuce. And it's also going to be able to take advantage of this spot that would otherwise be shady, because it's going to grow quite big, but because it's so vertical, it's not going to shade out the tomato. Let's go on to the next group of plants. Here's our beet area. Now, companion plants here, there are a few. And this is an experiment I'm doing this year. Right here we got all sorts of different kinds of beets, different shades of red and green. And right here we have some cabbage interplanted with the beets. Now cabbage and beets make good companions because of their different growth habits. Beets, of course, have the big root under the soil, and so it needs a lot of space underneath the soil, whereas cabbage needs a lot of space above the soil. Beets don't need so much space above the soil. And so now, I wasn't planning on putting cabbages here, so the beets were sort of already pre-spaced just to have for beets with beets. But it's an experiment, and we're going to see how it goes. I'll let you know later on in the season. Now on the other side here, with these bull's blood beets here, you can see some peppers. Also an experiment. I added these peppers in. I had some extra pepper plants, and I thought I'm going to give them a try as well, because once again the root system of peppers is not very extensive, and so I thought it's going to give the space for the beets to grow their beets, and then above ground the peppers are going to have extra space, and some of these peppers are spicy peppers, so they're going to help protect the beets. Here we have onions that are companion plants with many, many other plants. Now, onions grow really slowly, and so I started them really, really early in January. I started them indoors in January, and then I transplanted them out sometime in March, if I recall. And now they're doing really well. I wasn't happy with them at all when I transplanted them out, but they're doing really, really, really well. And so what I've planted with some of these onions, I've got some peppers over here. Now the peppers are quite tiny compared to the onions, which is kind of really nice, because onions are usually so small and so sensitive to having other plants close to them and shading them out. But these peppers are going to have time to grow and have time to get really, really big. But by the time they're so big that they're maybe crowding the onions, we'll be harvesting these onions, just like I said in the cabbage area. So that's going to be really beautiful. And some of these peppers are spicy peppers, and so they're also going to help repel some of the kinds of bugs that go after the onions. Now over here we have all sorts of stuff mixed up with the onions. We have cabbage with the onions, more peppers. We have calendula here. There's a lot of cilantro, coriander. There's borage, which is an excellent companion plant for almost anything. But the thing you have to remember about borage is it can get really, really big. And so while your other plants are growing and finding their space, it's important to harvest the borage and keep it small. It's just going to come back anyway. And you can, well, these are flower buds. You can wait for the flowers to open to harvest them. But all this stuff is edible. And it's so good. And it tastes like cucumber. It's really, really good. So just harvest it. And because it's going to grow back and it's going to grow more flowers, and it's going to be a great pollinator for when you have flowers here. Same thing with the mustard. If you want to keep it in the garden because the flowers are edible too, you just keep harvesting it, and you can put these leaves in a sandwich. They taste just like mustard. They're really good. And eventually you can let that grow, and it will attract pollinators as well. And finally here, we have a couple of sunflower volunteers. We have them all over the garden. I let these stay because they're on the north side of this bed, and so they're not going to shade out the plants. Let's go on to the next group of plants. So here we have our main pepper area. I only just transplanted these peppers maybe 3 or 4 days ago. It doesn't look like there are a whole lot of companion plants here, but there are. I'll explain. Over on that end, there's about 9 or 10 plants of chapiche, which look just tiny. They look like just blades of grass, but they're going to grow and thicken up. And then on that end of the garden, there are 3 Malabar spinach plants. They're going to grow up those trellises. And over here, right beside me, we've got bee balm here. We've got sage, sunflowers, and some mustard. That's right beside me, the mustard. Now, these look like they've been decimated. This mustard is cut right down. So are all the sunflowers. So is the bee balm. But these plants, it's just the sage that isn't completely cut down. But these plants are really strong companion plant growers. In 2020 or 2021, when I really pushed the companion planting, I made the mistake of letting all my companion plants just do what they wanted to do, and they ended up shading out all my vegetables. And that's the one thing that you want to be careful of. You want to give your plants the space, and you want to make sure your companion plants don't actually behave as weeds with your other ones. So what I do with these companion perennials, because the bee balm is really important, it attracts pollinators. It's also an aromatic plant. It's going to protect the peppers from different animals. The chapiche over there as well is very aromatic. So is the sage. So of course is the mustard. And then the sunflowers, well, they're just pretty, and they're going to attract hummingbirds as well. But the thing about all these plants is they're such strong growers that I can cut them right back. And I only do this right when I transplant the peppers, when they're small. I let them grow however much they want right up until I transplant them. Then I cut them back. I transplant the peppers, and now I'll be able to let them grow while the peppers grow. If the peppers take long to grow and these get too big, then I might cut them back again a little bit. What's important is that the peppers be able to get to full size while these other companion plants grow. And what's interesting about this is I've got bee balm, for example, in the contour of the garden that I don't cut back, so it's going to bloom a lot earlier than these, and these are going to bloom a lot later, and they're going to be bushier too because I've cut them back. So by cutting them back, not only am I helping the peppers along, still giving the peppers their companions, but also I'm arranging that I'm going to have later blooms, later bee balm blooms, later sunflower blooms, later mustard blooms. You might find it hard to believe, but this mustard is going to still grow, and also these sunflowers. And what's going to happen with both the mustard and the sunflowers is because they're cut, they're going to give extra branches, and they're going to have a lot more flowers. They're going to be multiple flowering sunflowers and mustard. Let's go on to the next group of plants. So here we have cauliflower, broccoli, and 2 different kinds of basil. The basil is going to be the aromatic plant that's going to repel the pests of the cauliflower and the broccoli. What's great about this area is the basil is very, very small, so it's not going to crowd out the cauliflower or the broccoli whatsoever. And in fact, in the height of the summer, basil does like a little bit of shade, although it also likes full sun for when it's developing, and so it's perfect right now. It's got all the full sun it needs. And then as these broccoli and cauliflower start to get big, well, I'll be harvesting some of them. If I notice that the cauliflower and the broccoli are a little bit too close together before they've even produced their, a big head of broccoli or a big head of cauliflower, I'll probably harvest a few, because these leaves can be eaten just like cabbage or kale. However, they are spaced about 45 centimeters or 18 inches apart, and so they should have enough space to develop. We'll be starting to harvest our broccoli and cauliflower at the beginning of August and all the way through to the end of the season. So as we start to harvest it, then there's going to be more sunlight for the basil, and the basil will continue to produce right up until a frost, which could be the end of September or right up until the end of October. Let's go on to the next group of plants. In here, last year we had potatoes, which are coming back. They're the big ones here. I also put some new ones, which are the little ones right here. These are new potatoes that I put in this past a few weeks ago. But in here this year I decided that we would also put some broccoli, some beautiful amaranth, some Swiss chard, and of course let some of the other plants grow. And there's also some millet over here mixed with amaranth. Somehow I managed to put two kinds of seeds in the same little pot. The two really important companions here are the potatoes and the broccoli. They support each other. The important thing when you're planting potatoes with broccoli or cabbage or anything like that is to make sure that the broccoli has enough space to grow while it's still young. And for example here, these potatoes, actually this is mustard, I'm going to cut in a minute. These potatoes are way too big for some of the broccoli around here, so I'm going to cut these back a little, which is okay, because when the broccoli is ready, the potato is still going to have lots of season left. And when the broccoli is bigger, I'm going to be able to allow the potatoes to grow bigger too. And the thing about the potatoes is the plant is potentially very beautiful, especially certain kinds like the purple Peruvian. But when they get too long and they start to fall over, they're not as pretty. So by trimming the potatoes down, they're going to get bushier and maybe stand up better. And they're going to stay smaller for the broccoli, so the broccoli can grow. So as you can see, there's some broccoli here and there's some broccoli over back there. I'm going to trim back the potatoes back there. But here, I'm going to show you how I do it. So I'm going to trim back this mustard because it's just going to regrow. And I'm going to trim back some of this potato. And I'm just going to do it. Trim it back, lay the stems on the ground around the broccoli as a mulch. I think I should have brought this sickle with me. That would have been a better tool to bring. Potatoes are just going to come right back anyway, but not that fast. They're going to allow the broccoli to grow. And when they come back, the broccoli will have gotten bigger. I'll have to check. I'm going to do the same thing with the others. So you let the broccoli grow big because the plant gets really, really big. It gets actually much taller than a full-size potato plant. And especially if the potato plants are trimmed back a little and get bushier, they'll be bushier and they'll grow bushier instead of growing taller, because it's like you're giving a message to the plant, and the plant actually takes that message and grows wider instead of taller. It says, okay, well, if I grow taller again, maybe I'm going to get cut again. So I'm going to concentrate on growing wider, and that works with most plants. Works for a season anyway. Let's go on to the next group of plants. Here we have a whole bunch of different plants that are growing, being companion plants to each other. The focus here is asparagus. Now in our first year here in 2020, I actually planted asparagus in the contour of the garden, but that was a mistake, because what I really wanted for the contour was that everything be growing really, really thickly. So the asparagus was not going to be able to have the room to grow in the contour. Asparagus is not a very thickly growing plant, and so it wasn't going to do the job to protect the garden like the other plants do. However, I just left it there because I wasn't going to pull it out, and so I just decided, it's been 4 years, I decided I'll just let that do its thing, and I've planted 5 other asparagus here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this spring. I got to harvest some of that rhubarb to give the asparagus back there a bit more room to grow. But the great part about this garden is this part of the garden for the asparagus is the only perennial plant that's here, that's right here in this section, is the rhubarb. And so I'm going to be able to make sure that this asparagus has all the room it needs to grow and develop so that we can have harvests of it every single spring for years and years to come. Now, because the asparagus is in its very first year, I really wanted to protect it. And so I've got calendula here that started blooming. Can't wait to eat some of this stuff. It's so good and delicious, juicy. And also I have some coriander, some cilantro here, which is also so delicious. And both the calendula and the coriander are aromatic, and they're going to protect everything. And the thing about the coriander is I did not like coriander the first time I tasted it. I learned to like coriander in Mexico. First time I tasted it, it was in empanada de amarillo. And I didn't really like it that first time, but I learned to like it. Because this is a really interesting thing about the palate. The human palate can learn to like any type of food. It's got to be food, obviously. It just takes a certain number of times to taste it. And the average is about 11. So let's say you take about a year and you try something about 11 times. It could be just a little tiny bit. It could be 9 times, could be 20 times, it could be 3 times. But eventually you'll probably like something you don't like. I tried that when I was 25 years old with olives. I didn't like olives, and when I was 25 I thought, this is ridiculous. And so I tried it, and it worked. I think it only took maybe 3 tries, and then I love olives. So right beside it we have some dino kale, which I find really, really beautiful. This plant, kind of a bluish green. And mixed up with the dino kale, we have radishes. You don't see too many of them because I've harvested quite a few of them. But let's see if I can find one. The great thing about radishes, wow, that's beautiful, as a companion plant is they grow really quickly. So if your plant needs a lot of space, you're going to be able to get the radish out of the way pretty quickly. And once again, it's spicy, it's aromatic, and so it's going to keep the bugs off the kale. And then now I can just harvest it and eat it. And you can also eat the leaves. You can make a pesto out of them. They're really good because radish is in the mustard family, just like the kale. And so the leaves are edible and a little bit spicy. So I hope you liked the video. Hope you found it useful. And like I said at the very beginning, if you know someone who could use this kind of knowledge, this kind of information to help them with their gardening, then share this video with them, encourage them to watch it. And if you haven't done so yet, then subscribe, support our channel, and maybe you'll be able to watch a few more videos. So have a great week, and we will see you next time.